Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks for coming back. Today what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit more about what happens when you read the Bible critically and some of the interesting things that pop up when you do. And I thought it'd be a nice cheery thing to talk about Christmas, because what's a happier time than Christmas? If you have put away your nativity scene already, which I hope you have because it's almost the end of March. If you haven't, you know who you are. Stay strong. You only got about 7 more months to go before it's appropriate to have it back up. Think about the nativity scene that you've either put away or that you're used to seeing around town. It usually has the same cast of characters, right? You have the Star of Bethlehem, you have your angel, you have Mary, Joseph, hopefully Jesus. You're going to have the shepherds, you're going to have the oxen, the lamb, you're going to have the wise men, everybody, in the procession. And we're so used to that nativity scene that we just kind of assume that that is the birth story. That's how it goes in the Bible. But when you read critically, you notice how your nativity scene during the holidays is actually an interesting synthesis and not a standalone event. Let me tell you what I mean. So we have 4 Gospels, and only 2 of them actually give us a birth story at all. Mark just starts straight off with Jesus comes from Nazareth and gets baptized by John, and he's off and running. No age, no backstory, nothing, just here he is, boom. John, as you know, starts with the very poetic, the very stoic, philosophical, theological. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, etc., etc. But then it just goes right into his ministry. There's no background on Jesus and his age or anything like that either. So we're left with Matthew and we're left with Luke. Now, we're so used to our nativity scene that we expect them to be the same story. But to read critically, what you're going to find out is the stories almost have nothing to do with each other outside of the names of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And to read critically is to figure that out. And let me show you what I mean. And if you guys are bored, what I suggest you could do as a little fun homework assignment is read the birth account in Matthew. It's the shorter one. And so just make a couple notes as to who the major players are and what the big things are that happen. Then go read the birth story in Luke, and you will see that they almost have nothing to do with each other. I'll give you a couple examples, and I'm sure you'll be able to find a lot more than this, but this just gives you an idea of what happens when you do that. Matthew has an unnamed angel appear to Joseph. Luke has a named angel, Gabriel, appear to Mary. Matthew has a visitation of the Magi, or the wise men, and the famous Star of Bethlehem. Luke doesn't have any wise men or a Star of Bethlehem, but he does have a choir of angels, and he has the shepherds. Matthew has them flee to Egypt, and then when they come back eventually, they make a new home in Nazareth. Luke doesn't mention anything about leaving for Egypt. He has them go directly back to Nazareth, which was their original hometown all along. They both have a genealogy, but the names don't match up at all. Look at the names. I mean, if you're like me, you normally skip the whole genealogy part in both books, but the names are completely different. What's going on? Matthew traces his genealogy back to Abraham. Luke, not to be outdone, goes all the way back to Adam. Why? What's going on? What is these differences, and what does it tell us about what the individual author of the gospel is trying to communicate to us in a bigger sense and across the whole gospel? Think a little bit more about the genealogies, because most people don't. You'll notice that Matthew makes a big point about, with his genealogy, that there are 14 generations from Abraham to David, another 14 from David to the exile in Babylon, and then another 14 from the exile to Jesus. So this is very important. Why? Well, it turns out, and this is just a theory, but the name of David in Hebrew has a numerical equivalent of 14. So there's something really important for Matthew of tying Jesus to David. Now, it's also kind of interesting that it turns out Matthew's so wanting that 14 generation thing to be perfect, he actually has to leave out 4 kings and a queen to be able to get there. But that's kind of beside the point. The point for him is tying Jesus to David. Now, Luke goes all the way back to Adam, and he pretty much flies by David and doesn't really, without barely a mention. But when he gets to Adam, he calls Adam the Son of God. So what does that mean for the bigger picture for Luke and what Luke's going to be trying to communicate in his gospel? So these are some of the questions and some of the things that then you start to look at a little bit more closely when you start to read a little bit more critically, like the scholars do, instead of mashing them together. Now, the Magi. Why would Luke leave out the Magi? Well, I'm going to give you the answer to that in our next podcast or session, whatever we're going to call these. And I'll give you a hint, though. The Magi, or the wise men, are affiliated with a really, really bad dude. We'll talk about that next time. In the meanwhile, be safe out there. Be your sister's keeper. Thanks, guys.